Welcome to Israel Now News. I'm Rebekah Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom.
In our top story, the IAEA has lost track of Iran's progressing nuclear weapons program. Rafael Grossi, the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, recently told his board of directors that the nuclear watchdog agency has lost continuity of knowledge about the production and inventory of centrifuges, rotors and bellows, heavy water and uranium ore concentrate. Grossi admitted that the IAEA has not conducted a full inventory of Iran's nuclear program in 3 years. Despite its failures in gathering information on the ground, IAEA officials do believe that Tehran has amassed enough fissile material for several nuclear bombs. This fear has been confirmed by Iranian officials who have bragged that the radical Shiite state already has all of the components for a nuclear weapon. The Israeli Air Force has established a task force to deal with the grave threat the Iranian nuclear program poses to the Jewish state. The team has been tasked with preemptive strike strategies, as well as eliminating Iranian proxy armies operating in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza.
Hamas leaders continue to refuse to provide any information on the condition of the remaining hostages held in the Gaza Strip. The Iranian-backed terror group infiltrated the Jewish state on October 7th and slaughtered 1,200 people and kidnapped more than 250 others to Gaza. 105 hostages were released in November as part of a ceasefire deal. Israel's war with Hamas in Gaza has left the terror group decimated and in disarray. It has lost over 10,000 of its fighters, and the remaining Hamas leadership in Gaza is desperate for a ceasefire so it can reorganize and rearm. The terror group is demanding a full Israeli withdrawal from the Gaza Strip and the return of displaced Gazans to their homes so that the Iranian-backed genocidal militia can rebuild its terror infrastructure behind human shields. Each one of these demands are a non-starter for Israel, whose first and only precondition for negotiations was information on the surviving hostages. At least 130 hostages abducted from Israel remain captive in the Gaza Strip. Many of them are injured and in need of medical attention. Israel has confirmed that not all of the hostages are still alive.
Iranian-backed Houthi rebels have caused a major environmental disaster in the Red Sea. The Yemen-based terror group has wreaked havoc in the strategic shipping route by hijacking ships, blocking the Strait of Hormuz, and even firing weaponized drones on commercial freighters. U.S. and allied forces have bolstered their presence in the Red Sea in an attempt to provide safe passage for boats and have even struck Houthi targets inside of Yemen. Last month, Houthi pirates fired anti-ship ballistic missiles on a cargo ship transporting combustible fertilizers. The boat sank, causing toxic materials to flow into the Red Sea. CENTCOM released a statement confirming that the vessel was carrying 21,000 metric tons of ammonium phosphate sulfate fertilizer, which presents an environmental risk in the area.
The fanatic Islamic Republic of Iran has placed another satellite into space, this time with the help of the Russian military. The Advanced Sensing and Imaging Satellite was launched on a Russian rocket from a military base located 5,000 miles east of Moscow. Tehran claims that the Pars-1 satellite is equipped with 3 cameras capable of photographing and transmitting high-resolution images. Israel and other world powers have expressed alarm over Iran's rapidly improving satellite program, which can be applied to its advanced ballistic missile systems and could be used by the radical Shiite regime to fire a nuclear-armed warhead on the Jewish state.
Jerusalem has slammed the European Union's decision to reinstate funding to the corrupt United Nations Relief and Works Agency. Israel has presented evidence that UNRWA employees took part in the October 7th massacre. They used UN facilities to store weapons and actively worked with Hamas terrorists. One employee even held hostages captive in his home. Despite the massive failures of the organization, accusations of anti-Israel bias, and the launch of a formal probe into its conduct, the European Union announced that it would allocate 50 million euros to UNRWA. Israel's foreign ministry released a statement saying that the EU's disappointing decision gives legitimacy to UNRWA employees' involvement in terror activities and cooperation with Hamas. Israel remains committed to transferring humanitarian aid to Gaza and working with other UN agencies and additional actors to ensure the distribution of aid to the Strip.
David Friedman, the former U.S. ambassador to Israel, has unveiled a plan to extend Israeli sovereignty throughout the biblical heartland of Israel. The program, known as the Future of Judea and Samaria, calls for Israeli sovereignty in Judea and Samaria and the Jordan Valley as outlined in biblical prophecy. It guarantees that sites holy to the Christian and Jewish faiths will remain preserved and accessible to everyone. In addition, it provides a solution that protects Israel's security, respects biblical covenants, and affords civil rights and human dignity to all residents living in the historic heartland of the Jewish people. This proposal was introduced as an alternative to the so-called two-state solution that the Biden administration has been pushing. Washington and other world powers have renewed calls for the creation of a Palestinian state within the borders of Israel, which would undoubtedly become another Arab terrorist nation in the region and pose a serious threat to the security of the Jewish state.
According to a new survey, nearly a quarter of Americans hold anti-Semitic beliefs. The poll conducted by the Anti-Defamation League reflects the highest anti-Jewish sentiment in the United States since 1964. More than 4,000 adult Americans were asked a series of questions to gauge their view of Jews. It revealed that 27% of respondents believe it would be somewhat acceptable for a close family member to support the Iranian-backed Hamas terror group. The ADL noted that in the 4 months following the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel, there were 3,283 anti-Semitic incidents in the United States, including 60 physical assaults, 553 incidents of vandalism, and 1,353 incidents of harassment.
Sheba Medical Center in central Israel has once again been named as one of the top 10 hospitals in the world. The annual ranking, published by Newsweek magazine, evaluated over 2,000 hospitals in 30 countries. Sheba Medical Center was ranked in 9th place after the Mayo Clinic and Toronto General Hospital. Professor Yitzhak Kreis, the director of Sheba Medical Center, said this is an extraordinary testimony to the fact that in these days, when the state of Israel is being challenged in the international arena, the Israeli healthcare system actually receives professional appreciation. He noted that data on soldiers wounded in the war reflects an over 98% survival rate. This, coupled with Sheba Medical Center's integrated rehabilitation program and its cutting-edge research, led the Israeli medical facility to being declared as one of the best in the world.
The discovery of an ancient gold pendant is being hailed as the earliest gold artifact ever discovered in an archaeological excavation in Jerusalem, and it proves a biblical account of the construction of the first temple. The small trinket, which could have been an earring, has been dated to the 10th century BCE and confirms the Phoenician connection to King Solomon. The Bible describes interactions between King Hiram of Tyre and the Israelite King Solomon and his son David. It also notes that Phoenician artisans came to Jerusalem with supplies to assist in the construction of the first temple. This gold charm provides the best evidence so far that Phoenicians were present in Jerusalem during the reign of King Solomon. It also proves there was trade between Jerusalem and Phoenicia at the time.
The Israel Allies Foundation hosted the largest delegation of lawmakers to the Jewish state since the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. The three-day conference included the chairman of the Israel Allies caucuses and governments around the world. The group was taken to the Gaza periphery to see the devastation caused by the Hamas terror group. The delegation of lawmakers also toured the biblical heartland of Israel. They received a briefing from Israel Gantz, the governor of the Benjamin Regional Council. The caucus chairman added their voices to those calling for the United Nations Relief and Works Agency to be dismantled after Israel provided evidence that UNRWA was collaborating with Hamas. The legislators also released a statement of collective opposition to the formation of a Palestinian state and spoke out against Iran. Josh Reinstein, the president of the Israel Allies Foundation, said in these challenging times, the gathering of political leaders from across the globe to express solidarity with Israel is of critical importance. He added that through dialogue, collaboration, and collective action, the Chairmen's Conference exemplifies a steadfast dedication to safeguarding shared values and translating faith-based support for Israel into real political action. That concludes the news portion of our show. Stay tuned for Ask the Source with Josh Reinstein.
Hello and welcome to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein, and we're here in our beautiful studio in Jerusalem. My guest today is Reverend Peter Fast. He's the CEO of Bridges for Peace. Reverend Fast, thank you for being on the show.
Wonderful to be here, Josh.
Tell our viewers a little about what is Bridges for Peace.
Bridges for Peace, we are Christians supporting Israel and building relations between Christians and Jews in Israel and around the world. So we're a global network. We're invested in Israel. All of our programs are basically done here in the land. But in each of our nations, we stand with the Jewish community in that country. And then we also build bridges with the Christian population. So in churches, seminaries, colleges, all kinds of things. And really to draw their attention to what God is doing in Israel and Jewish-Christian relations.
Well, we live in interesting times. We're in the middle of a war right now. How has that impacted the work of Bridges for Peace?
Majorly. Really on like a massive scale. The crux of it, this whole thing is that Bridges for Peace, founded around 1976, we've been in the land since then. So it's all about relationships. When you get rid of our programs and you boil it all down, Jewish-Christian relationships, people coming together. And so over decades, we've built relationships with towns, like mayors, municipalities, social workers, principals and teachers in those towns, Knesset leaders, rabbis, all kinds of people, all the demographics of Israeli society. So when October 7th happened, we had decades-long relationships. And a lot of our towns that we sponsor and that we have long-lasting relationships with and support were hit. Like Netivot, Ofakim, Sderot, even Kfar Aza a few years ago, we went there to bless the community with some support. So in this hour, we directly got impacted and the people that we serve and help.
You do a lot of things with helping people with food security. Mm-hmm. You have big food banks across Israel. Yeah. Has this been a major issue with all the people being displaced from their homes because of the rocket fire?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In a way that, even the state of Israel, nobody would be ready for this, the scale of it. Prior to the war, we were feeding about 24,000 needy Israelis every month, 10% about Christian Arab. But with the scale of displaced people and the hundreds of thousands, many of them are actually settled in communities that we work in, Bet Shemesh, Mitzpeh Ramon. And so we had our contacts in those cities, the mayors, leaders in those cities reach out to us. What can you do? What can you do for us? We have 3,000 people that aren't even residents of our community, living in hotels or put up in places that need assistance, who lost absolutely everything.
And most of your supporters are Christian. What was the response from them when you told them that there's a bigger need now than ever before?
The response, I would say, was immediate. Our response being Bridges for Peace International, because we're based here in Israel. We have our headquarters and our food bank here. So on October 7th, on that day, I rallied our media team. We made videos. We started doing press releases about what was going on. And our network around the world, they're prayer warriors. They're extremely loyal and dedicated, and they understand the relationship between Christians and Jews. And so they responded immediately. In just over 2.5 months, we raised over $2.5 million.
And what's the response of the Jewish residents of Israel when they see that Christians are rallying to the cause and are supporting them?
That's an amazing question because I've never actually seen an Israel like this. I don't think Israelis have ever seen an Israel like this. And so when they meet me as a non-Jew, as a Christian, a non-Israeli, and when they hear about what we're doing, tears, embraces, shock, because the assumption, especially if you look at the media and you see all the rallies, the anti-Israel rallies, is that to an Israeli, it must seem like the world is against them. It must seem like darkness came into the land, but also you have all these nations and groups that are condemning Israel, criticizing, maybe even denying what was blatantly obvious because it was filmed on that horrific day, and then to meet someone who represents an organization which represents hundreds of thousands, millions of Christians that are standing with them in the wake of the ICEJ South Africa genocidal accusation cases against Israel. One of our national offices in South Africa. We have Christians in Cape Town and Johannesburg standing arm in arm with Jewish residents and praying for Israel and singing Hatikva and these sorts of things. So when Israelis see that and I'm able to communicate that to them, it means the world to them. They are not alone.
You know, in Israel, it's a very trying time. We're at war, hostages are being kept in Gaza, rockets in the north, soldiers dying every day. One of the bright spots that we're seeing is that for the first time in over 2,000 years, the Jewish people aren't alone. There are Christians literally rallying in countries across Africa, Latin America, Europe, Asia, all over the world. Christians are coming together to stand with Israel. How significant is that?
We're seeing on a level, on a scale that has never been seen before in 2,000 years. There have always been non-Jews who have stood with Jewish people. Even in the Holocaust, we see righteous Gentiles who would hide Jews or take that risk to hide them or move them past or to somebody else or a safe house, but not to the scale that we're seeing today. So something happened. I really believe it's a God thing. We can talk about this. I really believe that God is shaking what we would call the church. And Christians are waking up to not only just the relationship, but seeing the past. And not that we're bound to the past as that it was my fault, but reversing it. We can't go back in time, but working towards a future, healing, coming together with our communities. And that's what this is about. That's what I think Christians are seeing, that this is biblical. It's prophetic. We have more in common than what we disagree with. And we actually need to come together for the sake of history, the present, and the future. And we're seeing it on a scale that has been seen never before in history.
There are literally tens of millions of people watching this show. What message do you have for our viewing audience?
Get involved, make a difference, be a light, and speak up. You can connect with organizations like Bridges for Peace. We are global, and we are connecting Christians and Jews together in a way that has never been done in history. So when you partner with us and pray with us and learn about the Hebraic context of your faith and the connection of Christians to Jewish people and the shared faith values, I believe you are beginning to love truly what God loves.
Thank you, Peter, for being on the show. And thank you for tuning in to Ask the Source. I'm your host, Josh Reinstein. Now back to the studio.
And now, the truth from Zion.
The lack of fairness and the application of a double standard against Israel among many global organizations is obvious. The UN is supposed to maintain international peace and security and, quote, develop friendly relations among nations. But time and again, it applies a double standard to the Jewish state, putting Israel's every move under the magnifying glass. Israel has a standing agenda order at the United Nations Human Rights Council in Geneva, Switzerland, meaning that the Jewish state is targeted every session. No other country in the world is singled out this way except for Israel. Think about that for a moment. At the United Nations, dictators are honored and their countries are given a free pass. Between 2006 and November 2023, the United Nations Human Rights Council adopted 104 resolutions against Israel alone. That's more than any other country in the world, and that includes Iran, North Korea, and Syria combined. Every time Iranian citizens rise up against the fanatic Islamic regime, the demonstrations are quickly and violently crushed, leaving hundreds of protesters dead or in prison. The Ayatollah's rogue nuclear weapons program poses a threat to the Jewish state, the Middle East, and the entire world. Tehran is the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, propping up the Houthi rebels in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, and other radical extremists throughout Europe and the rest of the world. But Iran does not have a permanent item on the UN agenda. North Korea is one of the most repressive countries in the world. It is a closed-off dictatorship that notoriously uses torture, forced labor, and starvation to achieve its goals. But it does not have a permanent item on the UN's agenda. Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad has used chemical weapons against civilians in the civil war that has ravaged his country. More than 600,000 people have been killed in that conflict, which began in 2011. Syria has been slapped with 17 UN Security Council resolutions, but again, it does not have a permanent item on the agenda of the UN Human Rights Council. Does this not seem disproportionate? When Iranian-backed Hamas terrorists infiltrated Israel on October 7th and slaughtered 1,200 people and abducted 240 others, United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres added insult to injury by appearing to defend the Hamas massacre. It was an outrageous blow to the Jewish people. The UN chief's insensitive statement came less than 3 weeks after the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel and before the IDF launched its ground offensive against the genocidal barbaric terrorist in Gaza. When horrifying videos and other evidence were made public about Jewish women who were attacked physically and sexually on October 7th, women's organizations around the world were silent. UN Women, the leading global voice for women's rights and women's health, took 7 weeks to issue a statement despite eyewitness testimonies and photographic evidence detailing the heinous, violent rapes of women. Some attacks were so perverse that victims' bodies were found in the morgue, contorted, butchered, and mutilated, leaving no doubt the savagery was intentional and evil to the extreme. The eventual statement from UN Women was pathetic and did not give a strong condemnation of the atrocities. The organization did not even offer a simple word of respect for Israeli women. Instead, leaders waited nearly 2 months and then made the statement inclusive of both Palestinian and Israeli women, diminishing its very impact. Educational institutions around the world allowed professors and students to rally in support of the Hamas terror group and refused to reprimand professors who, instead of setting a tone of tolerance, chose to incite violence and hatred against Jewish students openly on campus. In early December 2023, a congressional hearing was convened. The committee wanted to hear from the presidents of Harvard, the University of Pennsylvania, and the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. On the agenda was the subject of growing anti-Semitism and calls for the genocide of the Jewish people. The university presidents in the hearing unanimously suggested that they could do nothing about chants that call for the genocide of the Jews, and they each insisted that the words would need to turn into conduct before anyone could be penalized. As the Jewish community struggles to make sense of the worst massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, many people are not only left with a deep sadness, but also with the understanding that anti-Semitism is growing around the world, and yes, even in institutions that are supposed to fight it. Up next, the ICEJ report from the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem.
The Christian Embassy is here on the ground in Israel to help the people who were traumatized by this incredible carnage. And we want you to look at what the Christian Embassy is doing in order to help the residents of this war-stricken community here in Israel.
Since 1980, the International Christian Embassy Jerusalem has been a voice of Christian support for Israel and connected the global church to the land of the Bible. Headquartered in Jerusalem, the ICEJ has taken action to stand with Israel by caring for Holocaust survivors, helping Jewish families return home to Israel, providing bomb shelters, fighting anti-Semitism around the world, and by inviting Christians to discover Israel for themselves.
Shalom everybody, I'm coming to you from Kibbutz Be'eri. This is just a few hundred meters away from the Gaza Strip, And on October 7, here in this community, as you see, Hamas terrorists enter that community. They killed 10% of the population here, and a very similar carnage took place in many other communities around the Gaza Strip. People who lived here, you can see they have been traumatized. It used to be a paradise on earth, they called it. All the families that were living here, they moved out from Kibbutz Be'eri, and they are today evacuees.
In these very difficult and painful days, ICEJ is here on the ground in Haifa with some of our staff from Jerusalem and from Haifa, representing many different countries, in order to stand with Israel. They do it in a very practical way today. We just packing all kinds of toys that we will bring soon to places where evacuees are from the south. Haifa actually took many in from the south, and they're staying in all kinds of places in different schools, and the people came with nothing, and there are many children. So we want to give a little bit of joy to the children today when we go soon, to bring it to them, to bring those toys. And we want to stand with Israel in this very, very difficult time. And we want to be your hands and feet.
We brought a team from the Christian Embassy here today to Kibbutz Shephaim along the central Israeli coast. It's a beautiful, flourishing setting here, this kibbutz. But they've taken in the survivors, 135 families from Kfar Aza, this fellow kibbutz on the Gaza border, which is one of the worst hit of all the communities there. And we've come to talk to some of them and meet them and help them out.
It's been so devastating, really, David, hasn't it, to hear the stories. Our hearts are so grieved together with the people at this time. And we want to do something practical to assist. We know that there's so much that's going to need to be done. But today we brought encouragement and practical help for those who have lost their homes. Their lives are shattered. They came here, many of them, with just the clothes on their back. And so today we're going to be giving out practical assistance so that they can go and meet some of those basic needs. And that's just the beginning. We promised today, didn't we, David? We're going to stand with them and we're going to help them rebuild their lives.
We just ask you to prayerfully consider to stand with the Christian Embassy as we are standing with the evacuees here, not only from Kibbutz Be'eri, but the entire Gaza envelope communities. I look forward to hearing from you. God bless you. Hear from the Gaza envelope communities.
After Hamas brutally attacked Israel on October the 7th, 2023, the ICEJ has been actively standing with Israel and her people through advocacy and urgently needed aid projects. Now is the time for Christians to turn their love for Israel and the Jewish people into real action as never before. Your donation will help deliver bomb shelters to at-risk areas, provide necessary supplies for first responders, care for evacuees with food, shelter, clothing, and trauma care, and will eventually help rebuild these devastated communities. Visit ICEJUSA.tv to donate online or call 1-800-910-6355 and give your generous gift today.
That's all for this edition of Israel Now News. I'm Rebekah Roberts.
And I'm Yochanan Elrom, reporting from our studio in Jerusalem. Join us again next week for all of your Israel updates.